Hello, everyone, and welcome to TDWI's webinar program. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Linda Briggs. I'm an editor with TDWI, and I'll be your moderator. Our program today is Better Business Decisions Through an AI-Enabled Data Catalog. It's sponsored by Unifi. And for our presentations today, we'll first hear from Fern Halper with TDWI. After Fern speaks, we have a brief presentation from Andy Sheldon with Unifi. And Andy will then introduce two speakers who have a really interesting case study to share. That's Anil Srivastava with Open Health Systems Laboratory and Kenneth Buetow, who is a professor with Arizona State University. Before I turn the time over to Fern to get us started, just a few basics for the audience. Our webinar today will be an hour long. At the end of all of the presentations, the speakers are going to host a question and answer period. So if at any time during any of the presentations you have a question for a speaker, just go ahead and type it in there on your console and send it over. We'll get to as many of those questions as we can toward the end of the hour. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, there's a help area there below your slide window. You can click on that for assistance. If you're a Twitter user and you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter with fellow attendees, please include the hashtag TDWI in your tweets. Finally, for a copy of today's presentation, there's a click here for a PDF line there in the left middle of your console. In addition, as always, we're recording today's event, and we'll be emailing each of you a link to the archive so you can view the presentation again later if you choose, or please feel free to pass that link along to a colleague. Okay, once again, our program is Better Business Decisions Through an AI-Enabled Data Catalog. Our first speaker today is Fern Halper, who is a TDWI Vice President and Senior Director of TDWI Research for Advanced Analytics. Well known in the analytics community, Fern has published hundreds of articles, research reports, speeches, and webinars on data mining and information technology over the past 20 years. She focuses on advanced analytics, including predictive analytics, social media analysis, text analytics, cloud computing, and big data analytics approaches. Fern has been a partner at industry analyst firm Hurwitz & Associates and a lead analyst for Bell Labs. Her PhD is from Texas A&M University. And joining Fern today is Andy Sheldon. Andy is Vice President of Marketing at Unifi. In that position, he's responsible for defining the strategy and execution of Unifi's go-to-market initiatives. Prior to joining Unifi, Andy was founder and partner at Plus 2 Marketing, a boutique high-tech marketing and business consulting firm that had been providing marketing service to Unifi since its launch. So welcome, Andy. Welcome, Fern. Fern, I'm going to turn the stage over to you here.
Great. Thanks, Linda. Hi, everyone. And thanks for joining us on this webinar about data catalogs. We know you're very busy, and we appreciate you taking the time out to attend the webinar. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to talk about what a modern data catalog is and why it's valuable. I'll talk about the trend to infuse AI into data catalogs and what that means. Then I'll hand it over to Andy from Unifi, who will talk a few minutes before we hear, as Linda mentioned, this great case study from the Open Health Systems lab that's actually using the Unifi catalog to connect public data sources and create a global online catalog of oncology data and more. So I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that organizations are starting to make use of so many different kinds of data for analytics. And this data comes from a TDWI best practices report we did about a year ago on what it takes to be data-driven. And in it, we asked respondents what kind of BI and analytics technologies are they using to drive decisions now and in 3 years from now. So the red is using now, the pink is planning to use, and the gray is no plans. And you could see that the top area still includes spreadsheets, BI reporting, and visualizations that typically make use of structured data. Over 70% of respondents are using that today, but you could see further down on the list, and I've circled these in red, that there are other kinds of analytics that are starting to gain steam, such as social media analytics, text analytics, geospatial analytics, and even stream mining, which many of these are set to grow as indicated in the pink by over 30 percentage points in some of those pink boxes. So these are sort of making use of these quote-unquote new kinds of data, right? Text and streaming and geospatial and so on. And that data is coming from different platforms. So these new sources of data for analysis. This report comes from another best practices report that was done in 2017 about more advanced analytics. And we asked those respondents what kind of data management systems or other data platforms they were using. Again, the red is using now, the pink is planning to use in the next couple of years, and the dark gray is no plans. And there's a few things to notice here. At the top, you see that the data warehouse is still a leader, most probably for structured data. Over 80% of the respondents were choosing that, along with things like content management systems and other traditional data sources, data stores. But new growth areas include things like data lakes and data warehouses in the cloud. That's what's circled in the middle, down towards the middle of that chart. And you can see about a quarter of respondents are using them today, with more than 40% more planning to use them in the future. Why are they using these platforms? To help manage and analyze disparate kinds of data. The point is that organizations already have lots of disparate data, and that data is coming from disparate platforms, and they want to be able to analyze that data. And so, this is actually amounting to a lot of data. I was actually looking at another yet-to-be-released best practices report by Philip Russum, who's another one of our analysts on modern data architectures, which we call MDAs. And he actually tried to quantify the growth rate of the data that organizations are collecting and trying to analyze. And he asked those that are already sort of have multi-platform environments, what was the approximate total volume that they were managing both today and in the next couple years. And so, those that were managing it today had about a terabyte to upwards of 499 terabytes. What we often see is that we see an upper limit of about 10 terabytes. That's a popular number with companies just focused on their enterprise data warehouse, where they may actually have good insight into what data is living in that enterprise data warehouse. And then in 3 more years, these MDAs are going to experience data volumes in the 10 terabyte to 1 petabyte and greater range. So obviously, as these environments mature, they're headed for the so-called petabyte club, and the diversity and the number of platforms is increasing. And so clearly, all of this data can cause data challenges. And the ones that we see that are related to the data itself are often around accessing the data in the first place, right, from these multiple platforms, as I was just discussing, and then understanding the data. So each data store might have separate metadata, so that's the data about the data, when it was created, when it might have been touched, and that metadata might be complete or not. So that's a big issue that organizations are facing. And in fact, in a survey that we did, only 7% of respondents said that they were very satisfied with how easily they could find relevant data and understand how to use it appropriately for BI and analytics. Another 36% were somewhat satisfied, and the rest, about 37%, were either neutral or not at all satisfied with their ability to actually understand and find this data. And then, of course, you want to make sure another challenge is that the data is trusted data. If I'm going to do analysis on this data, I want to make sure that I trust it. And that goes hand in hand with data governance, which is about the policies and practices that an organization puts in place to deal with the data. And many in our audience are actually struggling to govern all of this data. So I just want to take a step back here for a second and look at this in a bit more detail about why organizations aren't satisfied by deconstructing sort of the analytics process so you can see where the problems start to come in. So in step 1, which is over there on the left, you could see that the user, which may be a business analyst or a business user or a data scientist, but they're focusing on the business question at hand. So they're trying to figure out what's the business problem. And that, for example, here I have what customers are at risk of churn. So as part of that, the analyst is going to look at the analytic goals, which is step number 2, that map to this overall question. Perhaps the goal is to find out which high-value customers have been inactive, which might be an indicator of churn, or maybe they want to take it a step further and build a predictive model. But what's going to happen is that the analyst is going to then ask what data he or she needs to do that analysis. And so that data might include things like billing history, sales history, demographics, and so on. So the user is probably going to want to derive variables from this as well. Things like how long someone was a customer, so they want to be able to do that sort of thing. But you could see in step 4, this is often times where the analyst really starts to get a headache, because they start to ask questions like, where's the data? Who owns the data? Can I get access to the data? Can I trust the data? How do I get the data into my analytic tools? And as the analyst starts to put the analysis together, he or she might see the same data in multiple places. So, which is the best source of data? What data is accurate? What's the right customer field? There are all sorts of questions. I think you get the idea that the person goes from simply asking a question to often pulling their hair out over what should be, in this case, which high-value customers have been inactive, should be a simple analysis. And the problem often revolves around understanding and trusting that data and accessing it. So that's where the data catalog comes in. So the simple definition for a data catalog is that it's a searchable data directory or inventory that describes the data. So it's a single repository that can be enriched as users interact with it. One issue with the traditional data catalog is that it's hard to manually update. Just before, right, I was talking about all of these data sources that you might have. And if you think about that, you can see why. A fully operational data catalog is going to document vast amounts of data sources, targets, and structures. And the data catalog size is going to increase as the organizations introduce new sources and new structures of data from new channels. And think about, channels, machinery, vehicles, consumer devices. I mean, there's all sorts of sources here. So in order to survive with all of this new data, users need cataloging software with intelligent functions that they can use to onboard new systems. And additionally, you're going to want your data catalog to support technical and business users, because they're the ones that are going to be trying to do a lot of the analysis and trying to understand this data. So you want to be able to get at the data and automate some of the processes. And that's where these modern data catalogs come in. What we're seeing at TDWI is that vendors are offering new technologies to help with this, and data catalogs is a really hot area and a very important area. And so these modern enterprise data catalogs offer new features. So first, these newer catalogs are offering search-based interfaces. Some of them do. And that makes it easier to find data and makes it useful for everyone, especially the business users. So I'm not just talking about a typical search-based interface. Some of these products that are out there, Unifi is one, use natural language for search. So it makes it easier because you're just typing in a natural language query for search. And, as well, you can actually also do things like ask basic statistical questions like what's the min or max or average, so you can get some quick and easy answers out of the catalog itself. And the second main feature of some of these modern catalogs is that they make use of automation. So I'm talking about doing things like tagging and cleansing and classifying data and sensitive data and syntax and lineage and so on. So for example, you might be getting a new data set in, and that new data set could be automatically scanned for sensitive data and then tagged so that tag-based security policies can be applied. Some tools do automated cleansing of data. Some automatically discover and suggest missing lineage between data sets. Some tools parse and deduce credible metadata. So there's a lot of intelligence that's going on here behind the scenes. There are other new features as well. So some of these catalogs offer up collaboration and crowdsourcing features so that users can rate data sets, for instance, or state what they used a data set for. This helps to build trust. We talked about natural language search for data access. Some tools extract metadata from multiple platforms and bring it together in the catalog. That's typically the highest priority of a data catalog because it takes metadata management that's siloed often to a centralized cross-platform facility to make it more comprehensive. These tools also provide hooks into analytics tools, and as I said, some provide quick analytics functionality in the catalog itself. And a good data catalog also helps to enforce data governance across environments. If you think about an enterprise scope data catalog, provides an inventory and can also act as a collaboration hub for governance. And so people involved in governance are often using it for that. So what we're seeing, in the way of these catalogs are a number of things. First of all, this data comes from a 2017 report, so this is about a year old. What we're seeing is that 50% of respondents to our surveys are using tools to maintain metadata models, not necessarily in a catalog. 48%, so again close to 50%, are using data cataloging and glossary development tech. And you could see that 25% are using some sort of AI, quote-unquote, advanced analytics for managing the metadata, oftentimes in this catalog. So they're moving sort of into this early mainstream, late early adoption stage with some of these AI-infused tools, although it's still pretty early. But it's important because respondents to our surveys also cite metadata management as a top barrier to these modern architectures that we were talking about. So let me just spend a couple minutes talking about what the AI is all about, how it actually works here. So I've been saying that some of these modern catalog tools are AI infused. So what do I really mean by that? What's the AI in AI infused? So I've been following and involved in the AI market for some time. As Linda mentioned, back in the 1990s, I was a member of technical staff at Bell Labs, where we did a lot of AI research and trying to apply all the AI technologies to customer data. And we had, in the research, we had a much broader definition than what I'm showing here. Here I'm showing a narrower definition that says that AI is the theory and practice of building computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. And machine learning and natural language processing, which I've been talking about, are subcategories of AI. And so we see AI in a lot of different places. It's in chatbots and virtual assistants, right? I mean, a chatbot could be a human doing it, but in this case, it's a machine who's doing the task of a human, identifying fraud, making recommendations. Humans can do that, but automation is coming in because oftentimes there's just too much data for a human to deal with. And what we're seeing at TDWI is that machine learning and natural language processing is being infused across the analytics lifecycle, from data management to predictive model building to deployment. As I already said, it's being used in data catalogs. So let's just look at two quick examples before we hear about the case study. So in machine learning, the computer learns from examples. Typically, they use either a supervised or an unsupervised approach. And there are other approaches, but these are two popular ones. And in the supervised learning approach, the system is given a target, target of interest, and that's sort of like a known outcome. In this case, say we were talking about churn or no churn. And then the system is trained on these outcomes using various attributes. So you're giving the system a lot of different examples of, what's a churn, what customer looks like churn, and what doesn't look like churn. And so you're supervising that whole learning process. And in unsupervised learning, there are no outcomes specified, and so the machine is oftentimes doing it itself. A real quick example, so that you understand the approach, is here's an example. This is an open source tool. You can see the open source. It's a deduplication open source tool that helps users train systems for deduplication. So imagine if you want to determine whether two companies with slightly different addresses and phone numbers are the same. And so you could see in column 1, there's the company name, the phone, and the address, which is slightly different from what's in column 2. But you can picture that the system, brings up these two records and it asks you could see the bottom with the purple boxes, are these two the same? And so if you click yes, then it's going to bring up the next example in column 2 and say, is that the same? And then, you say yes or no. And so the system is starting to learn, which are the same company name, phone, address types of records. And so this kind of thing is being used in data catalogs to recognize certain content patterns. So for example, you could teach a machine learning system or algorithm how to recognize things like social security numbers or license numbers. You could teach the system to learn something like an insurance number. You could teach the system to identify numeric strings to recognize other parameters, like if you have recent mergers and there's a customer ID, the system could learn to recognize what a customer ID actually looks like. In some cases, the systems could auto-discover it. In some cases, you would manually teach it. So that's sort of a little bit about the AI in the data catalogs itself. We're also talking about natural language processing as the second thing that some of these modern catalogs have. And as I mentioned, in modern catalogs, it's not just basic type of search. They're actually using semantic search. So that goes beyond keyword search. It's really about understanding the intent and contextual meaning. And this can use different kinds of techniques, including ontologies and knowledge graphs, or both together. And here I'm just showing a tiny little knowledge graph on this slide where you could see there are entities like the customers, and it says customer 1 lives at address, and customer 2 lives at address, and so on. So it's trying to show the entities and their relationships to each other. A simple example of this would be what happens when you do a Google search. Here I'm looking, and this might use a business glossary. So here I'm searching for a leather pocketbook, because I'm from New York, so I say pocketbook. But you can see that the system understands that a pocketbook is the same as a handbag or a tote, and I've circled those there. So that's a really simple example of semantic search. So just to conclude my portion here, takeaway is that as organizations collect more data from disparate data sources, they're looking to these modern data catalogs to help manage and trust this data. These modern catalogs are often infused with AI technologies that include machine learning and NLP. And then they provide better access to understanding and governance, and they provide trusted data. So with that, let me hand it over to Andy to talk a little bit about the Unifi catalog. Andy, over to you.
And very much appreciate your overview there. Excellent job. I'm going to just spend just a minute or so talking about the Unifi Data Platform for folks that perhaps are not so familiar with Unifi. And then I'm very excited to introduce the team from OHSL and have them talk through the use case. Very quickly then, the Unifi Data Platform is really two core products running on a data platform. The Data Catalog helps people at all levels of technical capability find data that might be useful for them as part of delivering on their business intelligence. The other is data preparation, the ability to combine multiple data sets together in order to drive insights on their BI tool. Underneath those two core pillars of the product are a series of technologies that help in delivering on those insights. Collaboration, the ability for users to share information about the data they've discovered, the quality perhaps of a description, provide ratings and feedback on attribute names so that others that are using the same data can learn from that experience, all boats rising higher, if you like, in the knowledge management of corporate data. Of course, exposing corporate data to a wider audience within the organization should not compromise governance and security, and it doesn't have to. with Unifi. We have a very strong governance and security capability where users are authorized to be able to have access to that data, and then certain attributes of the data can be masked, things like PII information, for example. Fern touched a lot on the use of AI, and absolutely AI influences every aspect of the Unified Data Platform, from the time we connect to a data source and auto-discover the types of data that are in that source, right the way through the prep phase where we recommend other data sets that might be joined with the selected data set. Our one-click functions automatically do cleansing, enrichment, normalization, parsing, filtering, and formatting, and so on. And so, really, AI is a critical element in exposing corporate data to business users across the organization. Having built data pipelines within Unifi, being able to set up operationalization workflows so that reports or insights can be delivered regularly is an important point. And of course, cloud optimization. Unifi runs natively on EMR and HD Insights, Azure, Dataproc, Google, really supporting all of the public cloud, as well as the other Hadoop infrastructure tools. So that is a quick overview of Unifi. What I want to do now is really introduce our two guest speakers. So very happy, excited to have OHSL here, a customer of Unifi, talking about the initiative that they are working on. And I'm honored to introduce Anil Srivastava. Anil is founder and president of the Open Health Systems Laboratory, located at the U.S. National Cancer Institute in Rockville, Maryland. Anil leads the Indo-U.S. Cancer Knowledge Alliance and the International Consortium for Technology in Biomedicine. He currently serves as an advisor for biomedical informatics at the Indian National Cancer Institute of the All India Institute for Medical Sciences in New Delhi, and visiting faculty and consultant on information technology for Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai. He has been associated with the conception and planning of the Indian National Cancer Institute from the beginning. Previously, he was a member of Apple's Advanced Technology Group. He continues his work as an advisor to the World Bank Group, increasingly focusing on health systems and planning for non-communicable diseases, treatment, and research in lower and middle-income countries. In the past, he's worked as a senior professional advisor with Booz Allen and Hamilton in the Asia-Pacific region. And joining Anil is Ken Buetow. Ken is a human genetics and genomics researcher who leverages computational tools to understand complex traits such as cancer, liver disease, and obesity. He currently serves as Director of Computational Sciences and Informatics Program for Complex Adaptive Systems at Arizona State University. As a professor in the School of Life Sciences in ASU's College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, he's a core faculty in the Center of Evolution and Medicine in the Biodesign Institute at ASU, and is Director of Bioinformatics and Data Management for the National Biomarker Development Alliance. Professor Buetow is previously served as the founding director of the Center for Biomedical Informatics and Informational Technology within the National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institutes. Please, I'd like to hand the call over now to Anil and Ken and let them discuss some of the programs they've been doing with OHSL. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Fern. Since Ken has to leave shortly, so I would like him to put forward his vision, because all that we're doing in Indo-US Cancer Knowledge Alliance is actually has a long history submerged in the work that Ken has been doing over the years. Ken, would you take it from here?
Sure. Thank you very much, Anil. We're currently living in a remarkable transformation of the biomedical enterprise. This transformation is both revolution as we move to a precision medicine definition of disease, morbidity, and mortality, but is also a a bit of a renaissance as we embrace the concept of personalized medicine and return back to the almost Norman Rockwell days where we tailor our interventions to the very specific characteristics of both the molecular definition of disease as well as the patient personal characteristics of disease, their upbringing, their background, their religious preferences. This transformation, though, as you might speculate, faces many challenges. First and foremost is literally the tsunami of data necessary for us to be able to address that problem. This data is multidimensional, ranging everywhere from the number of nucleotides that constitute one's genome. Each individual one of us actually has 6 times 10 to the 9th base pairs that need to be characterized. How those come together in the form of genes, proteins, and other molecular characteristics, but also then embedded into the multidimensional measurements of the individual as well as the environment in which they live. As you might speculate, this strains the current infrastructure and, to be honest, strains human comprehension. And we need novel tools for us to be able to wrangle this data, both because of its volume and complexity. We need to have ways to capture what we know about the data, the metadata about the data, as well as the internal and emergent semantics that describe what this data is. We need tools that facilitate this interoperability, integration, and interpretation of the data. So we're in the project that Anil is going to describe is working with the Unifi platform through the Open Health Systems Laboratory Group in a novel collaboration, the Indo-US Cancer Knowledge Alliance. Our goal in this alliance is to join the disparate and at times desperate communities, both in India and the US, to try to bring together this very complex collections of data. Our goal is nothing less than to leapfrog over the current challenges that face biomedicine in the developed world and implement in India a learning health system. A learning health system that is predicated on having smart electronic systems that manage patient encounters, but those smart systems then leverage the large collection of observations and, following the previous speakers, bring the insight of these new next-scale analytics to the bench and bedside of each individual patient. Our goal is to implement a true 21st century approach to leveraging all of this rich data and then presenting it in this new novel infrastructure to help change the care and health of the broader Indian and ultimately developed community. So with that, actually, I'll turn the floor over to Anil, who will talk about the specifics of OHSL, how we're going to go about this, and our particular collaboration and how we're planning to apply the Unifi platform. So Anil, take it from here.
Thank you, Ken. Just a little bit about OHSL is actually what we do is we find and bring together researchers from all over the world around a research proposition or capabilities that they have and put together a global team science consortia and help carry forward the project. I often say that what we do is we arrange the chairs and invite people to come and have a meet. So IOCA has been actually in some ways OHSL was born out of the work with Ken way back in the early 2009, 2010, where we were working with him on the CA-BIG program. And the idea, it is now OHSL is a California Social Benefit Corporation, and we have moved from Rockwell to Baltimore, the University of Maryland Biopark in Baltimore, and going forward on that. And we have 3 locations. Ken mentioned this project, IOCA, Indo-US Cancer Knowledge Alliance, which is a major project of collaboration between India and US, and data is at the center of it. There's a number of projects that we have listed here just to say what it is. And we are very closely working with Unifi and very excited about it to be able to use the Unifi platform to take fragmented data sets, which is lying all over the place, curate it, bring it together into a data lake, and provide, in the process of curation, improve the contributors or the holder of the data's own data quality and put it together. So that's what we're really trying to do. At the moment, what we have done so far in the last 5 months working with Unifi is to be able to start identifying these data sources, who has this data and where. Ken has been very insistent that by taking the fragmented data in India, which is lying around, and aggregating it together and putting it, that will serve as a good magnet for the international collaborators and international sources of data to be available. But at the same time, we are discussing with a number of data sets that are there in public domain that how to get access to it and how to bring it into it. And the collaboration with Unifi partly, we're hoping that what we're hoping for is how can we train the machine to learn to extract information and create a catalog which will be available to the data scientists across the world. We started, as I said, we're starting with India because we have more relationship, more control, and there is very little data which is organized into any kind of listing or catalog, and that's what we do. But the whole idea is how to make this available as a global tool, to researchers all over the world. So in fact, there is a tremendous synergy, the round diagram I showed, a tremendous synergy by making the data catalog available on cancer. We are hoping to find researchers and get the researchers involved in creating collaboration. I often quote, I call it the writing on the wall because this is at the IBM Almaden Research Center, a quote from Doug Engelbart, who says science and data to extend human capability. And I believe that is at the center of what OHSL is trying to do. The problem we are trying to solve in the next slide that you see is there are multiple research databases all over the world. In fact, Ken talks about data liquidity and talks that the semantic interoperability is more important than the syntactic. Syntactic can be achieved mechanically, but semantic interoperability is very important, and that's how we discover the hidden knowledge. And we hope that it will help us to actually take from data to create hypotheses for research. There's no common semantic layer. We have talked about it forever, and we are trying to make sure how we can, in the process of data creation, implement it. Data is not available for translation research because in America, of course, the researchers and clinicians have been separate. In India, where they are not separate, most often the clinician does not have easy access to the data. So we are at the moment developing an application with All India Institute of Medical Sciences, where we are demonstrating how this data availability can actually influence the decision when combined with the patient record at the bedside. And as I said earlier, the hypothesis generation is very important because we cannot be jogging at the same spot. We need to go beyond what has been done. And I believe India, especially at this moment, why IOCA is important, because we think India is poised to partner with the United States, researchers in the United States to carry forward, push the envelope on the cancer research and other areas of biomedical research. And sharing, in fact, what we are discovering over the years, sharing is not the norm. The culture that has grown, if this is my data, if I keep it to myself till I published it and it's been published, and even there I show as little as possible, I might be holding on to some intellectual property. And this is a cultural issue that we are on one-on-one trying to, by building trust with the researchers, we're trying to overcome that. And I'm happy to report that there is a lot some of them are actually responded to this request. In fact, I mentioned earlier the transcriptome study that Ken has been involved in with Dr. Badwe in Tata Memorial. He actually has taken the data, made it available and open, and finds that because of that, he has gained some insight that did not begin with the original hypothesis. So that we have kind of demonstrated that part of it. How we'll solve it to us, what we're doing is we are identifying public data sources and create a global online catalog. There's a lot of work that has been done by the National Cancer Institute and others in this field. But very often what happens is tends to close it and tends to say, okay, if you're part of that consortium, you have access to it. If you're outside that consortium, you don't have access to it. We're trying to make an effort that it's become a browser-based access to maximum amount of research data, because the reason is we are working with a very disparate community across the world who do not have the same computing platform, the same tools. So we want to remove that incapacity that is introduced by different computing platforms. And so we're basically trying to get as pure HTML and browser-based access as possible. Our effort is the process of building the collaboration and metadata descriptions and data quality efforts actually not only improves the data itself, but also we find is improving the quality of researchers and their concern with data quality. So there is a tremendous amount of time that is spent in interacting with the researcher in doing this. And this is very much integral part of our building the collaboration in research as such. So it's not a separate component. Data catalog is not separate. It's a synergetic and part of it. Definitely AI-based data set recommendations, mentioned earlier, and based on common data types is very, very key to it. In fact, I'm sorry for referring it back to Ken and C.A. Big. One of his major things was just this, that there has to be a common data type, common data definition, and that's it. Use of knowledge graph technology, yes, we are definitely doing that. But we are very fortunate that beside Unifi, we have an organization called Center for Development of Advanced Computing, and their bioinformatics group has a lot of expertise and experience, and they've been working closely with Andy and Unifi to see how they can apply these tools intelligently, and if there are any issues, how to resolve those issues. And our goal, our dream is API interface to all this knowledge for bedside decision making. So as a matter of fact, one of the prototypes with which we are testing it is in neuro-oncology, where there's a clinical decision support system which is being built, and we are, right from the beginning, we are looking at how can this catalog feed into that clinical decision support system. And the person who's heading our team there is also a medical doctor, the software team, and the person on the clinical side. Both of them are working closely on that. So we are hoping that this would lead to it. I think Andy has talked about Unifi's technology. We took a very early decision that we are not going to mess with technology, and we're not going to get affected by not made it here syndrome. So when we met with Andy and Unifi team, we realized that this is exactly what we would wish for and want to do, and Ken, in his effort, has actually been working on similar concepts before, so we're very quick adapters to that, and we are sort of taking it, following the Unifi model, if I can use the word, and using the tool, going to use the tool as effectively as we can, without doing much changes in the beginning. In the first year, we don't want to make any changes. We want to take it off the shelf and go forward and using it, focus more on data curation, data access, and increasing the pool of data. what do we expect from this? Our major goal is really to truly follow translation research. We want to take the bedside decision to be supported with the knowledge source, global knowledge source. So we are encouraging in our program on the translation research, we are encouraging people to actually build those interfaces and build the local data and use the data to query the global data. I mean, that's a dream, we are sort of pushing in that area. Immediate access to wealth of global knowledge is very, very important and key to IOCA, because India is in a major thrust for this year is setting up 20 cancer centers across the country. We're trying to see how can these centers be benefiting from translation research, not only translation research which is Indian, but translation research which is global. I mean, the data from global data curated and readily made available. One of the factors in this is Indian oncologists on an average see something like 40 to 50 patients, if not more, per day. So he has, not because of the insurance here that we have less time for the clinician to spend, but because of the patient pressure, the Indian oncologist has very little time to spend. So we want to, and there has been a very deep interest if I had access to global data on my fingertips, and that's the goal that we're trying to work with. We definitely, although India does not have a HIPAA and that kind and other privacy laws, as strict privacy laws here, but because as we said, that India is a proof of concept which we want to globalize. So we are making sure that the governed data model maintains security to above the standards that are applicable in the United States. We do not want to be lax on the security and governance of the data. We started with Azure because Unifi's instance for us was available on Azure, but I am happy to, just yesterday it was decided, talking to the Indian team and CDAC, that we have decided that everything we're doing, we're going to be on the cloud, on the three clouds, Azure, Google, and Amazon. And we are trying to build, and this is also very consistent with what another activity that OHSL has been involved in called ICT Biomed, International Consortium for Technology in Medicine, where we're working with a large number with a number of supercomputing centers in India, the US, in Poland, and Sweden, and where we're trying to see how can we create ease of use by the scientists. There definitely is, given the purchasing power parity and the lower cost, lower income levels in India and other low resource countries, we are very conscious of the cost. So what we'd like to do is to make sure that it's available at a low cost, as low cost as possible, so that a wider number of users can use the system both in India and abroad. So that is what we are working with. I believe I'm more of an optimist than I should be, and I do believe that I consider among President Obama's greatest achievement is the Open Data Initiative. And fortunately for us in India, the Indian government has come back with the same policy. Thing. So that exists. There's a data commons at the University of Chicago Center for Intensive Data Sciences, who have been very interested in working with us. Ken and I have had very discussions with them, and we're trying to take it forward. And one thing that many of you would know about it, but not in the products in the business community, that there is a major thrust at NIH called Big Data to Knowledge. My criticism of that is there is a lot of focus on technology, but I'm using that context to say, okay, OHSL and the Unifi OHSL collaboration in creating the data catalog is an implementation or the aspiration of the big data to knowledge, because we want to put it from bench to bedside and demonstrate how big data can actually improve patient outcomes. So I think with that, my time is more than up. I've gone over 2 minutes, so I hand it back to Linda.
Thanks, Anil. You're right on target. So let's go ahead and throw things open for audience questions. I see some good questions coming in from the audience already. If you have a question for any of our speakers, go ahead and type it in there on your console. Let's see how many of these we can get to. I want to start with a question. I think I'll direct this to you initially, Fern, but Andy, you may have a perspective as well. It's about trying to get the business side to understand data catalogs. So the question is, how do you illustrate the benefits of a data catalog to senior executives who think that IT looks after the data?
So you want me to, I'll start with that?
Yeah, Fern, could you take that one?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
We get asked that question on sort of a lot of different topics in data and analytics. And, first of all, I guess it sort of sometimes it depends who's in charge. I mean, some people will get it right away, but I'm taking from the point that the woman, it was a woman, I think, that asked that. I was looking at the questions. It's not, that's probably not the case. So I would suggest a couple things, and then Andy probably also has input into this. First is it's important to put it into business terms, and to help the executives understand what a data catalog actually means in business terms, and how it would help, and then also to build a prototype if you can, even on a subset, that would actually illustrate value. Maybe it's the answer to a problem that you've articulated in the business terms, and sort of show that. A lot of times that helps with the executives. So Andy, I'm sure that you've run into this issue also as a data catalog provider.
Yeah, thanks, Fern. This one comes up a lot. We're finding a couple things are interesting trends I might share. So I think most organizations, to a greater or lesser extent, have decided that strategically they must have better access to data across their organization, become data-driven. I think McKinsey did a study recently that talked about how much better an organization would be if it became data-driven. And I think as the C-suite tries to get their arms around getting access, providing more access to data, I think what we're starting to see is that people say, yeah, look, we really need to do that. And the starting point of the journey is we've got to figure out what data we have and where is it. And so that starts to then suggest, okay, well, we need some way of sort of discovering that data, and that sort of then brings in the data catalog. What we're also finding is, interestingly, is the role of the chief data officer at an organization. Most large organizations, most enterprises now have a sort of chief data officer role. They may have a different title, but somebody who is in charge of the data strategy of an organization. This is an interesting role because you've got one foot in technology, you've got one foot in the business, and both feet firmly in the sort of the political environment, really trying to help bridge the gap between the requirements of the business and the capabilities of the technology. And so we're also finding that the CDO, who has up until now had, maybe last year, has had a primarily titular role, has now started to take on more budget opportunity and capital purchase. So they are starting to justify the expense of a data catalog because it's really the starting point to expose more corporate data across the organization. And I think, some calculations can be made, and we have a white paper on our site that helps this, is if you contrast the traditional way of finding and using data to drive a business insight, you would have taken yourself down the sort of the IT support route. And as you start to provide self-service data tools to help on the discovery and use of data, obviously the amount of time taken to get that insight is much shorter. This can be calculated on just the salary benefits of the individuals in concern. But if, let's say, that insight drove an increase in revenue or reduction in cost, the sooner that you get that insight and can implement that change, the better off your organization is going to be, and that can be calculated. based on a percentage of revenue or a percentage of reduction in costs. So I think there are some good ways now to start seeing that, and I think we have some really good case stories now where companies who have implemented a data catalog or a data preparation product or both have been able to demonstrate to their organization both increased revenue and reduction in cost.
Here's a good question for Anil on privacy. Anil, the question is, how does OHSL manage the privacy of personal data when sharing it for research purposes?
That's a very relevant and good question, and there is no easy way. What we are doing is we're spending a lot of human time on one-to-one conversation with researchers and data, people who have data, to persuade them, and part of the persuasion is show them how we are working with the users and how we are going to maintain the privacy. It also becomes a little more difficult because we're working in a country like India in the initial part of the data set, where there is not that, there is a stated interest in privacy but not implemented. So there we become almost saying, no, we have to follow the highest privacy and standards, and we cannot violate it. So we have become a kind of a catalyst on the privacy on both sides, and it can only be done by making sure that we work one-on-one with the data user or data producer or the person who happens to have the data. Because we eventually want our market is global, and we know that if once it comes to United States and other Europe, it becomes a very, very, very strict requirement. So we do not want the laxity that might be in countries like India to lower the bar, but as a matter of fact, we want it to be higher. Now there is a whole question that, what is that bar which should be, and from the research point of view, what should be available and what should not be available, that we are working very closely. And that's something with CDAC and our team is also looking at how to work with Unifi to automate some of that process, but it's not going to happen in a short time frame.
Thanks, Anil.
If I could add there,
yes,
Linda, from the Unifi perspective, this is when Anil and his team came to Unifi and laid out this problem of the sort of the richness of data, but also data privacy concerns. I mean, this is one of the areas that we spent a lot of time reviewing the data governance and security capabilities of Unifi, where implicitly people are denied access to data. I know that sounds harsh, but in an area where you really want to ensure good governance around the data, is sort of implicitly saying, no, you don't have that, but you can prove that you should be able to have it through our governance capabilities, then we can authorize that. And also importantly to note that different users have different access capabilities. So authorizing a group of researchers into a data set, that can be done easily in support of LDAP or Cabarrus. But then saying, hey, look, these people have restricted access. So any PII information, patient information, for example, is masked from the viewer. So this doesn't prevent them from running analytics against that data, but it does prevent them from seeing the data in the analysis. And this is very important for compliance. Things like GDPR, where unauthorized viewing of customer data is not permitted. So that's a key piece. And Unifi has many customers that are where we are handling HIPAA data on a regular basis. And so not only is the product HIPAA compliant, but the environment and our working environment here at Unifi conforms to all of the HIPAA compliance pieces. So that's another important part of selecting your catalog vendor.
Let's see, Anil, let me go to you with an interesting question here. You touched on this in your earlier answer, but what challenges do you anticipate when moving from Indian data and users to global data and users?
I don't. This is a part of our core plan, so that we don't anticipate any difficulty or any transition. It won't be a sudden transition. It is a transition that starts from the beginning. And basically, it is a conformance to the best practices and knowledge of the data, that's there globally. And in that, we are very fortunate that we're working with some of the people who are thought leaders in the field, Ken, for example, and Kim Liley and other people that we are working with. So we are very fortunate in that. But we are sort of making sure from the start the data conforms to the international standards and international practices.
Thanks, Anil. Let me go
Ken,
to
Andy,
go ahead.
Go
Yeah,
ahead,
if Ken is around, maybe Ken can add to it. No, he's obviously not there. Yeah, go ahead, Andy. Sorry.
Linda, it's back to you.
Okay, let me go with this one to you, Andy. How's a data catalog different from a data dictionary?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a data dictionary often will describe information about the metadata. Sometimes it's called a business glossary. The idea here is that as users interact, and the business users interact with the data, it's important that they understand what specific attributes describe. A customer, what's the definition of customer in this organization? This is really important when you have consolidated multiple data sets or data silos. Perhaps through acquisition, you have multiple databases with similar data sets, but those other organizations may have considered a description differently. So getting everybody on the same page so that when they look at a data attribute as part of the discovery in a catalog, they go, oh, okay, so user ID in this context across all of our data means this. So I think a dictionary or a glossary is sort of a subset, if you like, of the data catalog. We can import data dictionaries if you're already using, for example, an Informatica business glossary or data dictionary, that can be ported into Unifi. You don't have to reinvent that wheel. We're finding a lot of people in the data steward role or the data docent role have external data dictionaries and can import those through Excel or some CSV file or other kind of database. So, it's again, in building the data, Fern touched on this, it's data about the data, and it's really getting the richness there of the metadata description is what's going to help users to discover what's being used.
That's great. Thanks very much, Andy. We are out of time here. If we didn't get to your question, Anil and Andy will be following up after the webinar with answers to your questions. We did have a lot of good ones coming in from the audience. I want to thank our speakers today. That was Fern Halper with TDWI, joining Fern today, Andy Sheldon with Unifi, and Andy's guest speakers, Anil Srivastava with OHSL, and Ken Buetow with ASU, who joined us briefly there in the middle of the webinar. Also, thank you again to Unifi for sponsoring today's event. I want to remind everyone that we recorded it, and we'll be sending each of you a link to the archived version. Please feel free to pass that along to colleagues. And finally, a quick reminder that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, webinars, and information on business intelligence, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. I encourage all of you to tap into that expertise. It's at tdwi.org. And on that note, from all of us here today, thank you very much for attending. This concludes today's event.